In this three-part series, I attempt to cheat at blackjack. Unlike card counting, which is what I usually do on this channel, cheating is illegal. Getting caught could end you up in prison. Prison doesn't sound like fun, so we got a blackjack table, a dealer, players, and casino surveillance and tried our best to replicate a real casino. The goal is to cheat without surveillance catching me. And let me tell you now, surveillance agents are sharp.
This dealer would be fired. At that point, he can pick out the table.
These days, cheating in casinos is incredibly difficult. With the latest security measures, technology, full-on gaming protection conferences, casinos have gotten very good at protecting their profits. So instead of trying to cheat at modern-day blackjack, we're going to be replicating a time where cheats thrived, the 1980s. Back in the 80s, things were different in Vegas. Surveillance existed, but due to the cost of tapes, the cameras were rarely recording. In fact, even further back, surveillance agents would sometimes use binoculars to watch games so they could see more clearly. Gaming procedures were a bit more relaxed. Casinos weren't aware of all the ways cheating was possible, so they didn't have the procedures in place to prevent it. After all, it's difficult to play defense when you don't know what you're defending against. So in the 80s, blackjack was more vulnerable, which led to people like Dustin Marks. Dustin Marks is allegedly a former professional card cheat. I don't know much about cheating, but after seeing Dustin with a deck of cards, I can confirm he's an incredibly skilled mechanic. Even from this angle, I basically missed it. He worked as a dealer in Vegas, and over the course of his time cheating, he never got caught. The statute of limitations is now over, so Dustin is free to share what he learned. He wrote a book, and he produced a videotape of his techniques. He's currently working on a cheating-themed show in Vegas. I met up with Dustin when I was in Vegas, and he gave me a crash course on all of the ways that he would cheat in casinos. And it's exactly those techniques I'm going to try.
Here is the plan. I'm going to study these techniques and practice them in the short amount of time that I have. And then I'm going to head to my very own, low budget, but still cool casino and try them out. I'll have one chance to successfully cheat. That is it. There's no second chances if you're trying to cheat in real life, so there won't be any second chances in this casino. The footage will then be reviewed by a few different surveillance agents. Whether or not they catch me cheating will determine whether or not I pulled it off.
In this first episode, I'll be attempting two types of cheating. But before I show you how these work, it's important I tell you this. Cheating is illegal. If you try this and you get caught, you could end up in prison. Also, most of the techniques were only possible back in the 1980s when gaming protection was less advanced. I'm not condoning or encouraging cheating. In fact, I am not the biggest fan of casinos, but I would never consider actually trying any of these techniques for real. That out the way, the first technique is past posting. This is where the cheat secretly adds an extra chip to their bet after they've seen their cards. Imagine they've bet $500. They're dealt a strong hand, so they secretly add an extra $100. Considering they're only doing this when they've got really strong hands, it's free money. Just doing this every now and again is enough to switch the advantage from the casino to the cheater. This is the most common form of cheating, and it's one of the only ones in this series that's still attempted today. People get caught trying to do this all the time.
This year alone, I've got like 6 pass posts.
A huge drawback with it is that it's a lot of risk for not a lot of money. You'd have to pass post a lot of times to rack up serious profits. And surveillance only needs to catch you once for you to get arrested. When I met Dustin, we mainly focused on card sleight of hand, so I spent time studying his videotapes on past posting. There are two techniques I wanted to try, the first one being the blackjack past post. This involves palming a chip, and when the cheat has blackjack, they flip over their hand to show it. Flipping your hand over is a normal thing to do in a pitch game, but it's how the hand is flipped that's important. Normally, when you flip over your hand, the blackjack is clear, but in this case, the cheat hasn't clearly shown the blackjack, so they casually spread the cards over to reveal it. In that moment, they add the palm chip to the pile. Good sleight of hand is as much about psychology as it is sleight of hand. These actions are perfectly motivated and disguise the chip ad well. Given my background in sleight of hand, I found I picked this up pretty quickly. I was surprised that this move didn't seem that hard.
The only issue I'm having is that when I drop the palm chip, a lot of the time, it doesn't land perfectly squared.
If that happened on the day, it could be a dead giveaway. Think about the implications of this. As a card counter, I have to keep track of the cards that have been played, do math in my head, be able to eyeball how many cards are in the discard tray, all to get a 1%-ish advantage. Adding a $100 chip to a blackjack wins an extra $150. $150 profit for just a few seconds of work. Well, if you can call cheating work. The second pass-post technique is a bit trickier. It involves adding an extra chip under the existing chip stack. Here's how it works. A chip is slightly misaligned on the cheat stack. The bet they place, around 5 chips, is carefully angled to make it harder for the dealer to gauge how many chips have been bet. These days, the cameras usually have a clear shot of the chips, angled or not. But back in the 80s, cameras weren't what they are now. When the cheat gets a hand that's likely to win, they secretly grab a chip under their cards. Then, as they go to tuck their cards, the signal that they're standing on their hand, they add the chip under the stack. They then pull the cards out to double check their hand and place them back under the entire stack. This might look easy, but doing this without knocking the chips over is challenging. Knocking chips over is a red flag to surveillance. I figured this was happening because the chips I was practicing with were lightweight. With heavier chips, it seemed to be better, but I was still not feeling confident I'd get this right every time. The cameras were set up to roughly mimic casino surveillance. I doubt we got every detail precisely like a casino, so we're going to give our casino surveillance agents a little leg up in other ways, try and level the playing field a bit. Unlike in the 80s, these cameras were decent quality, and our surveillance agents would get to rewind and rewatch. I wrote a fictional backstory to give some context, but more on that later. It was time to cheat at blackjack. First up, past posting. I'd be attempting to add a chip under my stack. Even though it wasn't a real casino, I was feeling nervous. We played for a while. I had to wait for the opportunity. I just needed to get a 20 so I could try the first steal.
20?
Yay!
I kept nervously arranging my chips so they slanted towards the dealer. Touching them and checking them again could look suspicious, but the last thing I wanted was to fumble the technique and get caught. When the opportunity came, I tried past posting at potentially the worst possible time. My first card was dealt fine, but I actually grabbed the player at second base's card.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, everything
All
good?
good.
Yeah. So,
This was a misdeal by the dealer. If we'd had a pit boss, they'd potentially have killed the hand there and then. But we continued. Even though there was that slight fumble, which could make surveillance focus on the game, I decided to go for it. I grabbed the chip and added it. Annoyingly, I knocked my chip stack over, the one way I didn't want to screw up. Not great. But still, I'd done the move, and I thought it was likely that I didn't flash. But then everything went wrong all at once. There was a major problem with the player on my right. He was playing two hands at once. When he hit, the dealer dealt the card to the wrong spot. He then picked up his card to clarify that he wanted it for the other hand. This is a definite no. Had surveillance been watching in real time, they'd have instantly called the pit to fix this hand. But our surveillance agents would be reviewing the footage later, not in real time. There were two possibilities. Either this disaster of a hand would grab their attention so much that they'd carefully analyse every aspect of the round, in which case they could catch me. Or perhaps the mistake would pull attention away from me, acting as misdirection. But it was done now. You'll see at the end of this video what they had to say. It was time for the next past posting technique. I palmed a chip and waited for blackjack. I didn't have to wait long this time. A new hand started and I got the blackjack. So I attempted to add the chip to my stack as I revealed my hand. It worked, but the chip wasn't perfectly square with the rest. Perhaps not bad enough to catch attention, but definitely not smooth enough to stand up to scrutiny. I'd find out if I pulled it off when showing surveillance. All of this was nothing when compared to the most advanced technique, stacking. For this technique, I'd need to deal, not be a player. You'll see how well that went later on.
You were atrocious as a dealer.
In this cheat, the dealer uses sleight of hand to stack the deck so a player is guaranteed to win a hand. The player and the dealer are working together. And of course, if you know you're going to win, you can place a pretty sizable bet and walk away with a lot of cash in just one or two hands. As you can imagine, this is not easy to pull off. Here's Dustin explaining how it works.
so what I'm looking for is two good cards, a jack and an ace. In this instance, they have to be 3 cards apart because there's 3 players. I call this key card 1, key card 2, and there's 1, 2, 3 cards in between. So if I wouldn't shuffle, just to give you the idea of how this works before I actually go through it, my agent at first base gets the blackjack. So now we'll do it again, only this time I will go through the false shuffling. You pick them up just like this. This goes here, cut card there, and we're in this position here. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a burn card. So now my stack or slug is down in the deck a little. Second riffle just retains that stack. Then I do a strip. And what I'm going to do is just come back to the top of that stack, a shuffle, and this last shuffle, I'm going to bury the stack down a little bit, so when the person cuts, he's not cutting 1 or 2 cards. Here's the cut card, I'll do the cut this time, And then let's just say I'm dealing out the cards for time's sake, and there my agent gets the blackjack.
This is pretty complex, but in essence, he's seeing a hand that if he was to redeal the cards, the player would get a blackjack. So he's maintaining that block of cards through a series of fake shuffles that allows him to deal that hand to the first player. Luckily for me, riffle shuffle based sleight of hand is something I've got a decent amount of experience in as a magician. If I was learning this from scratch, it could potentially take years. The hardest part was getting my head around detecting a potential opportunity. To deal the cards, pay out who wins, spot a lay stack, and then stack it was tricky. But after a decent amount of practice, I felt like I had the hang. In my experience, sleight of hand becomes considerably more difficult under pressure. Being able to stack a win in the comfort of my own home was one thing, but at the blackjack table is a different story.
It's terrifying.
If I just shuffled one card out of place and then gave the signal to my confederate, that could be an expensive mistake. And if the shuffle wasn't as smooth as butter, that could draw attention. And as a cheat, you want to blend in, not stand out. I'd now be dealing. My accomplice, known as an agent, was at first base. When I spotted a lay stack, I'd shuffle, maintaining the top stock. He'd cut the deck in the spot I'd mark, and I would sniff to signal he should place a big bet. We'd deal the cards, and provided I didn't screw it up, he'd get a blackjack, winning the hand. I dealt for a while before an opportunity presented itself. An ace for fourth base. Then count 4 cards, 1 for each spot, and there's a picture card. I just need to add a burn card, which I could do in the shuffle. I gathered up the cards carefully to make sure I didn't accidentally displace a card. Shuffle. Hold back 1 card, add the burn. Shuffle, maintain the top stock. Strip, maybe a bit too much of a jog, but at least I'd be able to comfortably cut at the break. Cut at the break and shuffle, burying the 11 cards in the middle, kicking 1 card to the side so my agent could cut where he needed to. I gave the sophisticated signal, and he placed a $1,000 bet. Blackjack. Blackjack. 1,000 on a blackjack. We played a few more hands before the shuffle. Normally you'd never do this twice in a row, but an opportunity presented itself, so I decided to go for it. I was so fixated on finding the potential stack that I forgot to take 2 of the players' losing bets.
And that's the dealer as well.
This is something surely surveillance would notice. I fumbled the second shuffle slightly, but I was pretty sure I'd maintain my stack. Same procedure, same player doing the cut, and another large bet at the start of the shoe. Would he get a blackjack, or did I miss? Blackjack. I'd done 2 different pass posts and 2 of the blackjack stacking shuffles. It seemed okay from my perspective, but there was no way of telling until I showed surveillance. We set up calls with 6 different surveillance staff. Understandably, most of them wanted to remain anonymous. The surveillance agents were at a disadvantage. They didn't know what the video was about. And because of my card counting videos, it was likely that that's what they'd focus on. They may not even think to look for cheating, which isn't ideal. Not to mention that they wouldn't have access to their usual surveillance systems and correctly placed cameras. They'd just be watching some unlisted YouTube videos. For the pass posting, I gave them a fictional backstory to give them some context, the important part being this section about me. Last week, he got in a minor disagreement as he claimed he had not hit when the dealer dealt him a card. The tape was reviewed and found that he had signalled a hit. It's unclear if he accidentally hit or was taking shots. I wanted to make sure that there was at least a little bit of suspicion on myself. By saying that I'd been potentially taking shots, which is a nicer way of saying opportunistic cheating, the surveillance agents wouldn't overlook me. For pass posting, I showed the agents 5 hands, 2 of which included the pass posts. As I expected, all the surveillance people were immediately taken aback by the first hand.
I feel like fourth base is up to something. I would have been a call for a reshuffle, like immediately. What just happened?
To different degrees, they all analysed, played back, and critiqued the hand. I sat there on the Zoom call, holding my breath as they watched it play out, hoping they wouldn't spot me past posting. Luckily for me, a huge amount of focus was on the procedural errors, and there wasn't as much focus on me. But I encouraged the agents to watch that hand as many times as they liked to make sure they'd made all the observations they wanted to.
We would ask for someone to be present at the table at this point.
We would have had something change. We would have swapped out the dealers.
And although no one caught me doing the chip ad, it's clear that the hand had so many errors that many of the surveillance agents would have called down and had the hand void. Towards the end of the calls, when I revealed I was cheating, it still wasn't immediately clear to everyone how I'd pass posted.
Yeah, you would need your surveillance people to be watching you like a hawk to even catch that.
That's a lot better than pretty much every capper I've ever seen. This is why it's important to have that bet shot. It's on every table. If you were like really slick and found a dealer who was not brand new, you could absolutely do this. This year alone, I've got like 6 pass posts.
Although some immediately saw it when they knew what to look for.
You grab an extra chip, and then when you're going to put it back, it's something to do with the chips themselves.
For the Blackjack Pass post, I also wasn't caught. Although that's not to say that there wasn't a lot of suspicion on me. In fact, one surveillance agent had such a strong feeling that something was off that they said they would have pulled me from the table.
This guy's making false claims, he's looking at other people's card. With him, it would be like, okay, it's either time for him to call it, or just we need to have someone there. No question.
That was a reminder that they don't need to know exactly what was happening to play defensive. They just needed a gut feeling to tell them that something wasn't right.
Yep, you had a palm.
That's correct.
If I was at my computer desktop, I would have definitely saw that. Too much of a red flag. Hand going over a bet, especially extended time like that. It just looks like when you actually put the cards down, you move the wager. You show that you drop one top, don't you? You've just added an extra bet. You grab the chip by your palm and you put it down. You can tell by the way you do it.
Something that really surprised me is that there were a couple of times where the agents thought that somebody else was past posting.
You see my pointer where it is right now, right there. Doesn't that look bigger than it was previously? When that first spot was like he could pitched a bit. It's like, did she have something on there? Did she put it on top? Why did she touch him?
But given that they were on the lookout for past posting, it was clear to me that if I'd done this at any of their casinos regularly, it would only be a matter of time before I got caught. For stacking, I gave them a similar backstory, but I told them to watch out for the dealer because he's new and a little overconfident. Each agent watched it through, but no one realised there was anything wrong with the shuffle. Even though I wasn't caught either time, some of the agents picked up on the frequency of blackjacks.
Focusing on the last 2 rounds, first base as getting multiple blackjacks.
And if they'd had a clearer shot of the bet, I think they all would have immediately picked up on the Confederates' large bet. Best case scenario, they'd be suspicious. Worst case scenario, they'd keep analysing the game until they figured out what was going on. It's by no means a perfect experiment. We filmed this in 2023 in a studio, not in the 80s in a real casino. Our cameras weren't set up quite right to mimic surveillance, and a lot of the cheating wouldn't be possible now, so it would be unreasonable to expect surveillance to catch it. What I'm saying is, our surveillance agents were working with some major disadvantages. However, I do think this video shows that these techniques were possible in the 80s. On the next episode of Cheat the Odds, I'll be attempting the most difficult cheating technique I've ever seen. Something that even Dustin Marks thought was far too risky to try in an actual casino. And let's just say, it does not go smoothly. But you don't even need to wait, because that episode is already online on Nebula as part of Nebula First. So you can watch it right now. Nebula is a streaming platform built and run by content creators like me. On Nebula, you can watch the entire Cheat the Odds and Beat the Odds series ad-free, with each episode usually coming out at least a week early on Nebula, as well as extra videos that I don't put on YouTube. There's a video of me chatting with Dustin Marks where he showcases a few different cheating techniques and shares some of the incredible stories from his time as a professional cheat. There's a video where I share stories from my card counting adventures that didn't make it onto YouTube, as well as an interview I did on card counting, a chat with card counter Sheriff, and more videos on the way. But that's just my stuff. There's also a lot of exclusive, high-quality content from other creators on Nebula. I highly recommend checking out a show called Crime Spree. It is very addictive. One of the cool things that's included if you use my link is Nebula Classes, which is exactly what it sounds like, Nebula creators teaching you cool stuff. Not to mention that signing up to Nebula is a great way of supporting me directly. This series wasn't the cheapest thing to make, and without Nebula, it just wouldn't have been possible. To get the next episode, extra videos, and all the other content on Nebula ad-free, use my link. You'll get Nebula and Nebula Classes at 40% off on the annual plan, which is just $2.50 per month.